Welcome back once again to the Demon Slayer comparison series. Now on episode 2 of the Swordsmith Village arc, which covers chapter 102, chapter 103, and most of chapter 104. So let's jump right into this episode because the last episode left us with quite the drastic change. And as it turns out, that big change at the end will continue on through the beginning of this episode as well. Again, this kid might not be physically protecting the doll in the manga since it's not actually there in that version, but he still takes a beating keeping the key from the Mist Hashira regardless. Something that Tanjiro did not take too kindly to, as he'll later jump in to intervene. Now, you might notice this going forward, but big moves like that of Tokito's chop and Tanjiro's grab are not nearly as visually loud as the manga portrays it. Even simple things like a lack of veins on Tanjiro is a good example. In the anime, it's much more tame, which does make sense. It's not like they're in a serious deathmatch or anything, even though the mood did escalate pretty quickly, and Tanjiro actually seemed to cough up something in the manga. This all happens so fast that by the time Tokito reaches for Nezuko's box and Tanjiro slaps him away, albeit in a far less vicious way than in the manga, we've already covered 7 pages in just 1 minute into the episode's runtime. And that speed continues on even after the opening plays and Tokito examines his variably injured hand depending on the version, as well as how fast Tanjiro can actually be when protecting others. An instinct that this kid shares just as well for his mechanical doll, but even though Tokito can't see that doll in the manga, he still feels just as compelled to test his strength against it, to the point where he's even willing to use one of the worst weapons you can use on a child: cold hard logic. Not a shred of emotion to be found in these words, or any semblance of effort to understand the perspective of others, and seeing as those are kind of the building blocks of Tanjiro's character, it's only natural that he would give the guy an aggressive high five. It's things like this that make Tanjiro a very likable character, but in my opinion what makes him a very well-rounded character is that despite the fact that he's considerate to a fault, he still doesn't turn a blind eye to the empirical truth of the matter. Even though he's not happy with the way Tokito put it, he still agrees with a lot of what he said. But just like how professional chefs can't exist without those who grow the crops, Tanjiro understands the importance of the swordsmiths, and every life for that matter. And that's what separates him from the Hashira in front of him. He may have gotten knocked out by said Hashira, but I still think he got all the brownie points for this short-lived argument, as well as a quick little manga exclusive look at Haganezuka before he passed out. But even when he did wake up, Tanjiro still seemed to sense that the guy was there before he left the scene. We'll see Haganezuka later, but for now, Tanjiro needs to get up to speed on what all that key talk was about earlier. Or in the case of the anime, asking what that doll was all about, as it was fresh out of the box in that version. Now, I know I keep bringing up that one change, but it's not without good reason, because from here on out, it'll cause us to get very out of sync with the manga script. See, in the manga, after Tanjiro asks what the key is for, the kid would normally say it's for a mechanical doll. He'll then go on to say that his ancestors made it and that it can do 108 moves, which elicits a special reaction from Tanjiro, where he'll then go on to infer that that must be why the Mist Hashira wants to train with it. But the anime goes a little something like this. After Tanjiro asks what the puppet thing was, the kid will say it's a mechanical doll and that it was taken away along with the key after Tanjiro got knocked out. He'll then clarify that that was the key required to use the doll. Tanjiro doesn't get surprised when he learns the doll's capabilities, but he does sympathize with the kid for a bit and then asks what the Hashira would want with it in the first place, thus leading the kid to say that the thing could do 108 moves, making it special in its ability to overpower humans. From there, Tanjiro doesn't exactly spell out why the Hashira would need it, but he does understand that he wants it for training before they both hear that training in progress. Did I lose you there? Long story short, it's pretty jumbled around with a couple of snippets of different emphasizations, but obviously the more noteworthy expansion was that of Tokito's training session with the doll. Because you know UfoTable has their own idea for adapting this open-ended page, and while it might be a short fight sequence, it's a stellar introduction to Tokito's very center mass heavy swordplay. It also gives us a good chance to get properly introduced to what is known as the Yoruichi Type 0, a doll that in the anime alone Tanjiro praises for being able to keep up with a Hashira. And seeing how this is Tanjiro's actual first time seeing this doll in the manga, the beginning of the next chapter is when Tanjiro finally says his line from the end of the last episode where he recognized the appearance of this doll, followed by his confusion as to why it has 6 arms. Arms that I'm convinced have some sort of 3D workflow incorporated in, but we'll get to that later. For now though, it looks like Tokito's keeping up with it no problem. He's reading all of its moves like a prodigy, and his kawaii crow here is very inclined to agree with that fact. just when you thought these things couldn't get any more ridiculous. Though it did manage to help Tanjiro remember where he recognized the Yoriichi doll from. Now, recognizing something in real life from a dream may sound implausible, but if it's one thing Assassin's Creed can teach us, it's that sometimes a lot of our memories can be retained in our genes. This kid certainly seems to think so. In the manga alone, he even went on to explain how this phenomenon plays into swordsmiths gaining experiences from their ancestors. Good intel from this kid, whose name we're just now learning is called Kotetsu. Sadly, this introduction is met with him witnessing his prized doll getting torn to shreds. Poor kid. It was just too much for him to bear to watch. But before Tanjiro chases after him to cheer him up, this is when we'll get our commercial break cutscenes for this episode. The first illustration is referenced from the last page of the last chapter, and the second one is referenced from a panel that we have yet to reach. Because before Kotetsu can activate Rage Mode, Tanjiro has to cheer him up first. Once again, this episode really plays to Tanjiro's strength as a character. He's the most positive realist I've ever seen, fully aware that he may die before accomplishing his goals, but positive that every little step he makes will be a placeholder for the next generation. It's a great lesson for a kid, and somehow it also drowned out the manga-only crows bickering behind the two of them. Tanjiro really brings out the best of everyone around him, and it makes the harsh reality of this world all that much easier to bear. And speaking of harsh realities, after Tanjiro talks Kotetsu down from the tree, they'll both have to face the fact that his prized doll went through quite the ringer while they were gone. Something that Tokito does not hide very well, especially in the manga with that thing sticking out of his wardrobe. Though in that version, at least he managed to find a scabbard for the blade that he confiscated. This guy seems to look at everything around him as disposable. He may not be doing it out of any clear ill intent, but it still affects those around him, Kotetsu being one of those victims. He's hurting so much that the weather turned bad a little earlier in the anime as he looks over his broken family heirloom. I don't know how the technology of this thing works, but rain certainly can't be good for it. Nonetheless, the two of them take a jab at reviving it anyway, and despite everything the thing has been through, it miraculously comes back to life. Now that's good craftsmanship right there. But even though you'd think Kotetsu would be happy enough with that fact alone, he doesn't want to let go of the other fact that his family lineage was trampled on. And unfortunately for Tanjiro, he's the exact tool Kotetsu needs to enact this revenge. Sometimes I guess it does pay to be a little too nice. Tanjiro will discover that the hard way at the start of the next chapter. Okay, well not immediately, because unlike the anime, the manga actually starts from the point where Kotetsu is encouraging Tanjiro to diss out Tokito. After that is when the real beatdown happens and Tanjiro officially does his flopping fish impersonation. This time while actually managing to hold on to his sword. It's while he's in that frantic state that Kotetsu will say the doll is weaker due to its arm loss, triggering us to go back to the beginning of the chapter where Kotetsu encourages Tanjiro to diss out Tokito. Now during their little moral debate, the manga would normally start playing some narration from Tanjiro and his desire to get stronger, but now it'll play after the doll goes for an anime exclusive attack on him. But inevitably it's a strike that puts Tanjiro right back in the ground. But fortunately, it also put us back into sync with the manga as Kotetsu starts spitting his words of coaching wisdom. Though having Tanjiro fight without any sustenance at all is more like torture than anything else. In my opinion, the anime doesn't really give Kotetsu the best impression, but that's probably because most of his strong points are hidden behind 2 fully unadapted pages. That's right, 2 whole pages were cut from the anime. So let's go over them real quick. To summarize, it pointed out that Kotetsu actually had a natural talent for analyzing fighting styles and has strong observational abilities. So his rant earlier wasn't without substance, and he understands that the drive to achieve something is many times aided with the feeling of anger. Very interesting that they showed Gyo at this particular moment. These unadapted pages also told us that between training sessions, Kotetsu taught Tanjiro how you can change the functionality of the doll based on how you turn the key. He used the Yosegi Zaiku puzzle box as an example. As it turns out, in addition to the key, the way you turn the specific parts of its body will also determine how it will move later on. This is why Tanjiro's training was more fruitful than you might think, because Kotetsu specifically set it to exploit Tanjiro's weaknesses. Tokito didn't know this, so earlier when he was fighting it, he didn't get the full benefits of training with the doll. So the skill gap between the two might not be as big as you thought. True, Kotetsu did switch out the blades with practice swords, but he did so because based on his observation, it would be better to build Tanjiro up to a certain level first. But in the moment, Tanjiro feels like even those are a little too much. So much so that he actually voices those lines this time. He has been 5 days without food after all. Without that manga exclusive information from earlier, it's kinda easy to paint Kotetsu Kotetsu as the next big tyrant of the Taisho era, but with it? Well, the upcoming Narration, which was adapted by Tanjiro, paints him as much more of an arrogant kid with good intentions. Though I do wonder how, with those mighty observational eyes, he couldn't see that Tanjiro was on death's doorstep. Maybe he was able to see past that, and that if Tanjiro pushed hard enough, he would go for a quick journey to the afterlife, which would grant him the ability he needed. Imagine being so hungry that you can't even cross the bridge to get into heaven. But I think that's for the best, because not only was he greeted with a nice massage, but also a shiny rock that he was somehow able to find by scent underwater. This is a representation of the ability that he will soon awaken, as back in reality, he's now able to smell the upcoming attacks of his opponent. I like how UfoTable approaches internal monologue when time freezes like this, because while still frames would certainly do the job just fine for most studios, it seems like once again they've decided to use 2D image manipulation to make it a Slo-mo moment instead, with some possible CGI work here and there. After finding out that UfoTable actually uses live 2D last episode, I've been very sensitive as to where it's being implemented, and this I think is one of those moments. It's already impressive that Tanjiro was able to predict the next move by this doll and finally get a good hit in, but UfoTable made this moment even more impressive by seemingly connecting traditional keys with live 2D technology. And while I suppose it could all just be done by hand, considering there's an entire team dedicated to this technology, it would be hard to imagine that there isn't some sort of it being used here. It works so well with the gradual effect work when Tanjiro finally gets his slash in. Sucks that he wasn't able to break his fall afterwards, but as a side note, this new ability of his seems to be aided by a layer of blue color grading when time slows down. Keep an eye on that going forward, because visual tells like that are very important to this show. Again, especially because this show doesn't have a narrator like in the manga, so some information isn't literally relayed. Case in point, there's another upcoming page here that is totally unadapted by the anime, and it talks about Tanjiro's new ability. To summarize, it basically says that this new ability is much faster than the opening thread technique he's been using. It also states that he doesn't quite have the reflexes to keep up with these predictions quite yet, but it does put his movement close to that of a Hashira. For a power-up that immense, Kotetsu really should have given him more food when he asked for it. Nonetheless, it seems to be enough for Tanjiro to utilize his new ability to a point where he can actually keep up with the doll. It goes without saying that this short and simple choreography has no real connection to the manga, but the final strike by Tanjiro most certainly does, because this is the blow that'll finish the job once and for all, which is exactly what Tanjiro was afraid of. Thankfully, due to anime time, Tanjiro's stall in midair was met with reassurance from the observational Kotetsu, who could tell that Tanjiro wouldn't finish the job otherwise. In the anime, he probably noticed Tanjiro's sword starting to veer away from the doll at the last millisecond, which may be why his sword ended up breaking again, but still, if he can decapitate a demon from that angle, I'd say this training is a resounding success. He still needs to get better at sticking the landing though. He even ended up getting a quest reward at the end of the day, because by defeating the doll, he was granted a 300-year-old sword, a legendary 5-star item that Tanjiro and Kotetsu actually get to react to this time before the chapter ends, but for those of you who saw the next episode, well, you would know that their following reactions are much more fantastical. But we'll cover that hilarious event next time. All in all, this episode was a fairly tame one compared to the last episode, but story-wise, it took care of a lot of loose threads. Get it? Because Tanjiro doesn't need the opening thread technique. Anyways, a lot was built on this episode, and if there's anything we know about Demon Slayer, it's from those foundations that will start moving non-stop until the very end. We'll get into that next time, but for now, that'll just about do it for me. If you like this video, then make sure to give it a like, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more Demon Slayer content like this. Also, I'm doing live reactions to this arc on my Patreon right now, so if you want to see my ugly mug, or get your name listed here, or not have to wait a millennia for me to make the next comparison video, then possibly consider that too. If not, that's fine, because I still hope that every single one of you has a fantastic day. So, until next time, this is Registry, signing off. Take care, everyone.